and I'm very big welcome to our 181st Security Thought Leadership webinar. As you know, this is where we debate a topic of security interest, of security relevance. And the idea of thought leadership is trying to critique what's going on today in order so that we can do a better type of security in the future. And the topic going forward is topic today is a big one. Food protection, the ultimate security challenge. I want to just say it's facilitated by the ISAC, Food Defence and Agricultural Security Community. Now, this topic, I've got to tell you, is very broad. Food safety, food defence, food security, food poisoning, food terrorism, all about food protection. So it's very diverse. And what we're going to be doing today is looking at the confluence of food safety, food defence, and the contribution to food protection. That's going to be the main focus. As always, I'm going to introduce our panelists in a minute, or get them to introduce themselves. And then after they've all been introduced, we're going to do an opening statement from each and then come to you, the audience, for questions. So do get your questions ready. Please use the question and answer button at the bottom of the screen. Without further ado, then, let's go and meet our international set of experts for today. And first off, let's go to Andy. Andy, please introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andy Griffiths. I am a European Regional Security Director at Firmenich, a manufacturer of fragrances, flavours and ingredients. I'm also the ACES Food Defence and Agriculture Security Vice Chair, a steering committee member, and also coordinator for the Fake Carrier Intelligence Group.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. You're very welcome. Mark, please introduce yourself.
Good day, folks. My name is Mark Whitrock. I'm the Assistant Director for our Health, Food and Agricultural Resilience Directorate inside the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Health Security. In this role, I'm responsible for oversight, coordination, and integration of the entirety of our DHS food and agriculture implementation efforts.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Over to Megan. Megan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Megan Francis. I work over at Lamb Weston. I am the Corporate Food Protection Manager who specializes in intentional adulteration and food defense. And I am a steering committee member on the ACES Food Defense and Agriculture group.
Thank you very much. Is it community these days, Megan? I can't keep up with it. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
And finally, to David. David, please introduce yourself.
Welcome. I'm David Goldenberg. I work for the University of California Western Institute for Food Safety and Security, and I'm a training coordinator. In addition, I volunteer my time for an organization called InfraGuard, and I'm the National Sector Chief for InfraGuard. InfraGuard is short for infra, meaning infrastructure, guard, guarding the infrastructure. It's a nonprofit set up by the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that works with the private sector. And so we work and we provide information flow with the private sector between the FBI and our food industry.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Don't we bring you an expert set of panelists every week? Absolutely fantastic. Clearly very, very experienced in this subject matter. So as usual, I will now invite each of our panelists to make an opening statement. Just up to 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, when they get the chance to say whatever they want to say about this topic. While they're talking, think what questions you've got. Use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. And please get your question in early and we'll endeavour to incorporate it in the discussion that follows. Without further ado, let's go back to Andy. Andy, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. Food protection is a concept that leverages the outputs of food safety and food defence. Related activities are representative of several challenges faced by the industry as hostile actors continually seek to exploit vulnerabilities within food production and supply with a degree of ever-increased sophistication and technical proficiency. During probably one of the most challenging periods in recent times, global food supply chains have become increasingly vulnerable to the threat posed by geopolitical, financial, and security instability. Many businesses are also impacted in one way or another by the rising cost of energy, fuel, and the raw materials used to manufacture finished goods. Add monetary inflation, the COVID pandemic, regional conflicts, and supply chain disruptions into the mix. From a security perspective, we see all the ingredients come together for what many within the food industry regard as a perfect storm. Now, for those who operate with harmful intent, with uncertainty comes opportunity. Using criminal organisations as one specific example, they are like any other legitimate business. Their leaders are both entrepreneurial and opportunistic. They are also motivated by financial gain. as they seek to exploit areas of security weakness and vulnerability and to commit intentional acts of theft and fraud. In my submission, manufacturers who outsource their transportation requirements are particularly vulnerable to organised crime activities, as they may be compelled to source additional transport capacity by the spot market, for example, utilising the services of an online freight auction site. Now, although the majority of businesses use these services without issue, this is a particularly risky strategy for those organisations to fail to conduct proper due diligence before they ship their goods. Now, finally, constrained by spiralling production and transportation costs, many manufacturers aim to move large freight volumes, often with minimal security, as efficiently and as cheaply as possible. Some organisations and food manufacturers, acts of targeted theft against their goods may even be a risk that they're willing to accept. So to conclude, from a security practitioner's perspective, the implementation of effective transportation, security and cargo theft mitigation has never been more important, but as yet has never been more challenging. And it's for this reason that I believe food protection is the ultimate security challenge. Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And look, lots of good stuff there. Plenty of points being made. We'll pick up on these in the discussion later. Don't forget, get your question in early. Use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. Without further ado, then let's go to Mark. Mark, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Gil. In my role, I work with key stakeholders across the U.S. federal, interagency, federal government, state, local, tribal, territorial governments, academia, private sector, and international partners to implement this resilient food protection systems. One of the challenges that we found is even in the context of food protection, a defined term that you see in your chat box, it's somewhat self-limiting. We need to think more broadly across the food and agriculture resilience spectrum. It's that farm to fork continuum. If we wait until the processing and food production stage, we're already too late. We need to think more holistically across the entirety of the domain. And similarly, the words that you threw out earlier, Gil, food safety, food defense, food security, food fraud, food protection, they mean different things to different stakeholder groups. It's more than just about definitions. We need to think about what those definitions mean to different stakeholder groups and how we can message those appropriately to across audiences that we're working with. In our efforts to implement resilient food and ag efforts, we try to align with our U.S. National Response Framework that covers this continuum from preparedness, prevention and preparedness, all the way to crisis response and recovery. And in that context, we recently conducted with our federal U.S. interagency partners a 120-day risk review that looks across our U.S. food and agriculture sector. And this was deliberately scoped and to be broad to encompass this broader overarching discussion and theme. The main focuses were largely cut across 4 different domains: livestock and poultry, crops and forestry, aquaculture and fisheries, and then food manufacturing and distribution. And we crosswalked or cross-matrixed those with those high consequence and or catastrophic events impacting the food and ag sector.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. I think we've lost you.
Those being chemical, biological. Yeah, those cut across the high consequence and or catastrophic events, the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and cyber, and impacts of climate change. But we referenced that there's different anchor points even beyond that in the complexity of the food and ag sector. And so deliberately threw in aspects of foreign acquisition, what that means, gaps in preparedness, what that meant for this food protection effort, industry consolidation, what that looks like for food protection. So food security, we like to say that food security is national security. Economic security is national security. Health security is national security. And for these reasons, I think that food protection might be one of the ultimate security challenges.
Excellent, excellent. That's put in perspective its scale. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. So we lost you for just a split second there, but all good now, all good now. Right, let's go over to Megan. Megan, your opening statement, please.
All right, today I'd like to talk about the importance of public and private partnerships in protecting food terrorism. In order to protect the global food supply from food terrorism and maintain food security, there must be open, clear, and transparent communication between private industry and public government. It is well known that in order to reduce food safety incidents, there must be collaboration between these entities. These efforts should include any recent potential threats or incidents to the sector to help drive resiliency. Food defense incidents at this time are difficult to find either publicly or privately in a defined forum. This could be due to the sensitive nature of these type of attacks. The reluctance to share this information from private industry is due to many different reasons, mainly for the fear of reprisal, brand damage, and public perception. Collaboration should be focused on continuous improvements to reduce the likelihood of an event occurring. The impact of food terrorism can be significant. To illustrate this impact, I ask you to think of any recent food recall events. Most of these products span across the state, the country, the continent, or even across the globe. This is one of the many reasons that it's essential to have this partnership and to strive for continuous improvements to strengthen our resilience in the sector. Some benefits of this partnership are increasing cross-disciplinary expertise, maximizing resources, sharing information, reducing vulnerabilities and risks, and to build trust. These partnerships will allow us to learn, grow, and build a better future. This will ensure that current policies continue to be relevant and assess the risk and vulnerability that is reflective of present time to ensure that the intent of the policy is being met. We should be learning from what has occurred in the past and applying this in current time to protect the food supply. This is why food production is currently the biggest security challenge. History should be an indicator to gauge how attacks could occur to protect the global food supply. There must be a need to build these partnerships that encourages open, transparent communication that shares incidents that occur without fear of reprisal for industry and protects industry and ultimately the consumer. Recently, there has been an increase in cyber attacks projected at the food and ag sector, but little information is shared about the cause or prevention from these incidents. Radical terrorist groups continue to threaten our food supply via many different mechanisms, but little information is being shared on preventative measures to mitigate the risk. We must learn from the past and adapt as events occur to increase resiliency and to ensure that the food supply remains safe from acts of food terrorism. I will end my comments with this question. What can you do to help collaborate in a public-private partnership to help encourage a culture of food protection, the ultimate security challenge? Up next will be David speaking to the importance of information sharing in relation to public-private collaboration efforts.
Thank you very much indeed, Megan. Brilliant. Really appreciate those points. Now, can I remind people, if they'd like to get the questions in on the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, then we'll incorporate it into the ensuing discussion. We've got one more opening statement to go, though. Let's hear from David. David, your thoughts on this topic first, please.
Thank you. I want to congratulate Megan for her great work. And I think what I like to do is to take it a little bit further on information sharing. So there have been a lot of recalls over the years due to food safety. But what has occurred from some type of intentional tampering? And so I like to mention just a few. There in 2018, there was a attack on the strawberry industry. A disgruntled employee put pins, sewing needles, into strawberries. That resulted in a $160 million crop had to be destroyed. And then there were additional copycats in apples and bananas, and it's kind of reminiscent of the Tylenol scare and tampering of 1982. Here in the U.S., JBS, a meat company, was attacked from a cyber attack, and they held them over for ransomware. Then there's been a number of firms coming in and taking company acquisitions, like China has taken over Smithfield Farms, and everything is operating fine, but one day that may not occur. We've also had a rash of fires at food processing plants across the country and also internationally. Is there some connection there? And then we're still feeling the impacts of supply chain management problems from COVID. So, unless you produce your own food, we rely upon others. And so we take it for granted that food is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at our local grocery stores. But what would happen if that didn't occur? And how do we all communicate? So regarding communication, our industries would communicate internally within their own industry or within their own company. There are nonprofit trade associations where we communicate. And then we also communicate externally with governmental agencies. Here in the U.S., the federal agencies would be the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, also our Department of Homeland Security, which Mark is with, and then a multitude of state and regional governmental agencies. And then we have this organization that I belong to, and that's InfraGard, but you have to be vetted to be able to get into that organization. So, and then there's also another organization within Homeland Security. It's called the Cyber Information Sharing Act, or CISA, and that's another organization where they're sharing information, but you have to be vetted to be able to get in. So there's really no one organization that represents agriculture in regarding of sharing information, which is what Megan was talking about. There is an organization called ISACs, or Information Sharing and Analysis Centers. There's a number of them for different sectors, but there's none for agriculture. And so some nonprofits have taken on that activity of sharing information between the industries and also government in a two-way platform that is secure. But again, there's not one for food and agriculture. So I think it's time that food and agriculture have its own ISAC, so that we can share information in a way so that everybody feels secure to be able to do that. There's about 27 different ISACs. They represent healthcare, aviation, communication, energy, maritime, and national defense and water, to name a few, but again, none for food and agriculture. So for these reasons, I think the food protection is an ultimate security challenge, because there's multiple agencies that work with the private sector. But one question I have to ask is, are they all talking with one another? And is the industry talking with them? And I say no, and I think that it's time we have that.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Your final comment actually is rather interesting, because I've got a question here for the panel from sent in. Well, he doesn't want his name read out, but the question says this: your panel are giving the impression that the holy grail of sharing information and collaboration between partners in the state and private sectors is well developed and committed to good practice. If it is, the holy grail has been solved, you've solved the problem the world is trying to solve in other areas. Is it really that good? Is the relationship really as strong as it was? I wonder if I get each of you to comment on this, because you've all mentioned it in different ways. It's collaboration, information sharing, partnership, whatever the word is you want to use. What are the challenges there? I'm assuming it isn't quite as good as all that. What are the challenges there? Where do we go? I'm going to ask you each for a brief comment on this. Starting with you, Andy.
Yeah, so I would say that the approach varies depending on the regions or where you're located. I would say that the level of communication engagement can be and often is extremely fragmented, with conflicted availability of resources and budgets. So I would say it very much varies depending on where you operate and within which region you are operating within.
Okay, I mean, Mark, what's the barrier here? What's the real problem we've got about this collaboration? Because I'm assuming that this is a challenge for you too.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Our biggest challenge in information sharing is trying to be less stovepiped in the discussions that we're having with key stakeholder groups, and looking more across the entirety of this food and ag enterprise that I talked about. And that includes many, many different parts, pieces, stakeholders. The communication largely in a vacuum of one particular discipline or one particular stakeholder group may be much, much better. But what's lacking, first and foremost, is that strategic dialogue across communities. Thank you.
Yeah, but I mean, the strategic dialogue, what's the barrier to getting one, Mark?
The focus is largely on my little slice of the pie, and so that's what I'm charged with implementing. That's what I'm going to be most determined to execute on. I have little bandwidth and/or time to talk to my community friends over on this side of the spectrum. It's important, but I'm only focused on my day-to-day job, absent dialogue elsewhere.
Okay, I mean, Megan, I mean, this issue of, you mentioned open, transparent communication being an element. I mean, this is in something as dynamic, A, as important, as you've all been saying, B, that has such a wide field of reference and so much risk from so many parts. State sector and private sector involved. Open communication, collaboration would seem to be of the essence. I'm just trying to get a sense of the barrier to doing that better, or is it very good? Megan first, and David finally.
I would say that there has been attempts, but I'm not sure that the information from the industry is really being heard, or maybe it's not being understood, or it's not being conveyed very well from industry. And then a lot of times the communication doesn't go out in a way that's accessible to everybody. And a lot of times it's last minute. So people aren't prepared to provide the insight that we need to.
And I guess, okay, so what's the way in which we could overcome that?
By having a defined area or a way to actually communicate that's well known and publicly accessible to industry. Okay.
Now, David, this comes back to strategy. It seems to me more and more there needs to be maybe a global one, but at least a countrywide one, a strategic approach to managing this issue. Is there one? If there is, it seems to be lacking to me. I'm just going by what you said. If not, why not?
Well, I have one word to answer that, and it's called trust. And I think industry has to have trust that the information is going to be handled appropriately, and one, that they're getting information that's trustworthy from other sources. So unless there's trust across all the sectors and all the agencies and all the food and agriculture components, there's never going to be a good communication. We have to be able to trust the other side, and that's what it comes down to.
And David, is there a sense that that trust isn't there?
Well, we're not utopia, so we haven't got that holy grail. So I have a story, if you would allow me, if there's enough time. Sure. So I know that one particular farmer had a theft on his farm, and the people came in and took some petroleum, gasoline out of a tank, but they left the hose on the ground, and it spilled out petroleum or gasoline on the ground, and it went into the soil. When an inspector came out to take a look at it and write a report it was the police, they noticed that there was a spill of the soil. So the officer then told the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, about this, and then they wrote the guy up a ticket. And that producer said, "That's the last time I'm going to call the police when there's a theft on my property, because it cost me a whole lot of money." So trust is very, very important.
Yeah, I mean, on the first 180 webinars, we've heard that issue quite a bit. This is why I was just dwelling on it a bit, because you would hope in this area it would be more developed. Perhaps in some ways it is. Let me move on, though. We will come back to this, I'm sure. I want to get some questions. And Mark, I'm going to come to you first, and then you, Andy. And it's this issue about fires and issues which have been crippling the soft targets in the supply procurement chain in the US and Europe. Are they coordinated? If so, is there a state player mark-based agency coordinating the attacks? And who's looking after this from the major organisations? I mean, clearly there's some concern out there, because I got a comment in advance about this very issue. Mark first, then I'll come into Andy. Mark.
Yeah, the central coordinating function for the federal government for these bad actors and cyber attacks on key industries, it's largely twofold. DHS has a critical role, but also the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Those are the central intake points for federal government action to try and counteract these bad actors.
I mean, and is there a sense that this is a coordinated set of attacks going on? I mean, is this a common problem at least?
Oh, it's a huge problem. Yeah, huge problem. And that's largely the bulk of the makeup of our cybersecurity and infrastructure security component within DHS, is precisely to look at these bad acts. Unfortunately, the position that we collectively find ourselves in is we're still in crisis response mode. So attack happens, how do we respond to that attack? What we need to get better at collectively, and even the coordination function, is trying to be better at that strategic predictive preparedness. That's what's lacking.
And why is, so that sort of sounds obvious, Mark. When I hear it, I think, that sounds an obvious thing. Why is that? Why is that not obvious in practice? Why is that not happening?
Well, I think it goes to the age-old, how can I predict that X attack is coming from X country? There's so many bad actors with malicious intent out there that it's hard to stay in front of that. The strategic or the predictive preparedness that I talk about isn't specific, or can't be specific to one potential bad actor. It has to look collectively at the spectrum of potential bad acts to put countermeasures in place and a layered approach in place to ideally circumvent these before they become actual acts.
Yeah, no, therein I can see the complexity. I mean, US, Andy, Europe, the question was also asking about your thoughts.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that in Europe, the approach is more fragmented. Yes, we have umbrella organisations such as Europol, who act as the central point of contact for regional and country police forces. But the harsh reality is they just don't talk to each other. The flow of intelligence and information isn't forthcoming. And we often don't have visibility of local issues that have a wider impact within the industry. So to go back to my original point, I would say that there is no overriding strategy and the approach is very much fragmented.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by that. You know, I can't tell you how often we come back to this point about there being no overall strategy. I was just sort of slightly hoping in this topic that we might be further down the line. I just want to come to you, David, on this, and then Megan on a related problem. And David Earl has asked the question. So the last question was asked by Ned Spall. This is by David Earl. I'm interested in the risks posed by hostile states, David, buying into food supply chains. Goodness me, is this happening? What are your views on this, and how will the risk manifest, and what should be done to protect? Goodness me, hostile states. David.
Well, yeah, you know, we are a free country, so we can protect, but there is something called the PASS Act, which now does prevent foreign actors, especially from countries like North Korea and others, Iran, that would, you know, that are hostile to us from buying properties. I mean, they've also bought properties close to our national defense centers, you know, or army centers, things of that nature. So we want to be careful and be smart about it. But we are a free country here, so you know we take on certain risks by being a free country.
Yeah, I mean, is it okay? But then is there a solution to this? Surely you could stop people buying things that are a threat to this sort of security. Surely that's not unfair.
Well, there is something called the PASS Act, and does give some flexibility, but you know that's beyond that's more to the governmental agencies, right, than private citizens.
Yeah. Okay. So is there anything that the private sector should be doing with regards to this this type of threat? I'm just thinking it through because it's got enormous implications. It must feel pretty miserable, I would have thought, if you're in the private sector on the supply chain and the government are, well, it's a free country, you can do what you like. It seems a bit weak.
I know it, but that's the reality. But you have to be smart about it, right? And so we have to educate people who have that property and might sell to another individual. But if money is sitting there waiting to be had, you know, it's up to that individual. So,
yeah.
I think education and making sure that people are aware of the dangers, and then making that decision afterwards.
Yeah, education awareness is a massive issue, you know. It's just so complex, and so many people want to educate and make people aware on these broader topics of security. Meg, I just want to bring you on this because there is these about how these risks manifest as we're hearing, and for many of us, this is the first time we've had this sort of discussion, me included. Megan, this idea that coming across is that obviously a lot's going on in this area, but the risks are wide. The actors have got a lot to gain financially or disruption to society. I mean, overall, how well do you think risks are being managed when they come from outside the country, when they're either hostile states or organised criminals coming from different parts of the world? I mean, is the sector, in your view, pretty well geared up to protect against that?
I would say from a standpoint of cybersecurity, no, the industry is not anywhere near where they need to be to react in a healthy way to prevent these types of attacks. But it doesn't mean that we can't get better and learn from incidents that have occurred. But overall, I don't think that we are anywhere where we need to be in 2023.
Yeah, interesting. Mark, where would you characterize the sector in terms of this issue? Would you agree with Megan?
Oh, absolutely. And to expand on points that were raised earlier, there's a number of competing factors that prevent our ability to get our heads around this challenging problem. We are a market economy. There is a focus, particularly from the private sector, on economies at scale and what ultimately is driving my bottom line. If I'm private sector, I have to be a successful business in order to remain viable. So that competing factor corrupts or has cascading impacts across supply chains. If I, as a private sector aspect, am reliant on different products, precursors, what have you, from overseas corporations, that has significant impacts that cascade across my ability to exercise my bottom line. So industry consolidation, trade disputes from a diplomacy perspective. Friends today don't necessarily mean friends tomorrow. And so if I own, as a foreign state, own a particular market share of a critical sector within the United States, I may turn on the US tomorrow. I may not be your friend. And so I could exert that diplomatic pressure. We do have, as mentioned before, a committee on foreign investment in the US to look across key threat indicators and foreign acquisition of our US food and ag sector. But even there's holes. Again, we are a market economy, so we have to keep that in mind.
Okay, Andy, tell me, I mean, Europe, tell me it's better than that in Europe. Tell me we're in a good state over in Europe. Andy?
Yeah, I'd like to say we were, but I think the message is the same from Europe. You know, we are operating, continue to operate in a fragmented way. You know, industry looks after itself, and we have the appropriate level of mitigation measures within our respective businesses. But in the wider context, the approach is not joined up. You know, there's a lot of work to do.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a chance on this because given everyone else, it seems a biggie. Your one hope for optimism, David, where are we? What in your view?
Well, we have to remain vigilant. We have to educate people. You know, even within the private sector, not everybody is fully on board on this until it impacts them. And so, you know, it's always somebody else, right? Somebody else got killed or somebody else got robbed. It's not me, so it's not my problem. And until it becomes their problem, that's when things will begin to change.
Yeah, okay, really interesting. I mean, fascinating, actually. Let me go to the next question then. Mark, I think I'll come to you because it overlaps something you've just said. This is an anonymous question, but it's out of concern of a loss for shareholder value and brand devastation. Many internal product attacks will almost always hinder, if not prohibit, open sharing regarding many elements, such as how the intentional adulteration happened and what preventive measures failed. Is it true that one of the big barriers is the fact that businesses are looking after themselves and therefore there's a real commercial concern here? I'll come to Andy next. Mark.
Oh, of course, this goes to that trust aspect that David brought up before. Again, I have my thinking with my private sector hat on, I have my proprietary interests at heart. And if this gives away too much to either federal government or other competing industries that are my competitors, I'm going to be reluctant to share that data. So how can we break down those barriers to anonymize the information sharing to benefit a larger aspect of this sector?
And just in a sense, where are we with that? I mean, is good progress being made, or is this an area which because really out there in the big wide world, this is a commercial reality, right? We can get pure about it in terms of security and prevention if we wish, but the commercial reality is usually the trump in this.
Well, it goes back to proprietary interests from a private sector standpoint, but even from the federal government standpoint, it's how can we collectively identify incentives that help break down this logjam. It's a work in progress skill, honestly. It's nowhere near, I'm even hesitant to give a percentage of completeness. We're certainly nowhere near close. Okay,
fair enough. Andy, I'd just like to get you on this as well. This issue of commercial reality, commercial competitiveness being a barrier to understanding what's going on and developing an effective response. I mean, how big a part of the blame is that?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd like to say that obviously kind of commercial brand reputation is everything to most businesses. I've certainly experienced situations where incidents or issues have not been shared in order to protect the business, to protect its brand and its reputation. I do think, though, there is a willingness to share, certainly within industry, and there is a need, certainly within law enforcement, to obtain that information, so they have a wider view on how big this problem or this issue is. But the problem is that there is no mechanism by which this information can be exchanged in a safe way, in a confidential way that maintains the integrity of both the source, but also the information that's being shared. So it is a huge problem, to your point.
Okay. Megan, I mean, on this issue, I just want to, and here's where I'm really going with this. On previous webinars, we've come across this point that unless we all coordinate, unless everyone shares across the board, cooperates, partnership, collaboration, whatever the word is, convergence, sometimes slightly different thing, but nevertheless, we're forever on the run. And we had a terrorism webinar some months back now. And these sorts of issues were cropping up there. And there too, I'd expected to find it was all much, much more advanced and much more developed. Still there's sort of commercial realities, lack of trust, and develop mechanisms that work really in the interest of the commercial sector, believing that what they give won't then be used against them or be used for other commercial purposes. Megan, that seems to sum up where we are with this world too. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that food safety is not a competitive advantage and that we need to be willing to share information. Obviously, we have to, some information can't be shared, but I think that, like what Andy was saying, there needs to be a way to convey this information, whether that's just between industry and government, but there needs to be information that can be out there so that we can be more prepared to react to these incidents as they occur, and better be so that we can be more proactive instead of being reacting after the fact.
But here's the point though, Megan, I just want to get to, because this point about information sharing, a key theme of this webinar. When you say it's when you make the point, it's not where it needs to be, and there are clearly problems. Surely in this area, there is no excuse for not sharing information that has got such dramatic impact if it all goes wrong. That no excuse. Everyone's got to do their bit. Megan.
Yep, absolutely. I 100% agree. The information needs to be out there and it needs to be shared.
But it's not. It's not. You know, David, I'm going to give you just a comment on this bit, because this point about information, it's a big theme that's run through what's been saying and about why we called this webinar together. Here's what I'm hearing. David, that there are major barriers here in terms of a lack of structure, lack of trust, self-interest, and a fragmented agenda about what the priorities are. If you want to write a script for offenders, that'll do. Thank you very much. I'll start with that. I'm just thinking from the offender's perspective for a minute. David.
Well, you don't want to give away information, right? That's going to be harmful. So, I go to this organization, the National Sector Chief, the InfraGard. The Federal Bureau of Information does put out information that's sensitive. They won't put out classified information unless it's, unless there's a need to know. So information is flowing, but the rest of us may not have the access to that because it's not a need to know. So I think that there is information that's sharing. I don't want to give the thought that we're totally not sharing information. There is, but the rest of us, if we don't need to know, we won't have access to all of that. So I think it is going on, but I think in general, the idea of this seminar is to talk about maybe we start with small incremental steps and getting to the point where we're really getting the information that we really want. And that's where we really need to go, and start with baby steps.
Yeah, I mean, that seems good advice. Let me move on quickly because I want to try and get a bit more in if I can. Mark, Robert Norton says, how is the government planning to handle information sharing to food and agricultural companies that are multinational, particularly those that might be influenced partially or wholly, those who are owned by groups partially or wholly hostile? Mark, a very good question. I hope you've got a good answer to that very good question.
Well, great question. I think the short answer is we're working on that as well. I do want to reference the fact that we, in our U.S. construct, just the Biden administration just did sign out in November of last year a national security memorandum, NSM 16. It's called, on strengthening the security and resilience of U.S. food and agriculture. information sharing and how that works from private sector to external stakeholders, to include international engagement, is first and foremost referenced throughout that national security memorandum. But again, it comes out, as David mentioned, there is information, voluminous amounts of information. It's shared, but this goes to part of the stovepiping challenge that I referenced earlier. It's not shared broadly based on a whole litany of reasons. And another aspect that we're also working to evolve is this notion of terminology and how those evolve, but also just the aspect of threat and risk in our US government construct, and evolving those beyond just bad actors, state actors or intentional bad actors, but other threats and risks to the entirety of this food and ag space.
Okay, I'm fair enough, and I think it's right to say we need to take steps. I think you're right to point out that there are things going on. The idea of thought leadership, though, of course, is to critique where we are. That's the purpose of this being. Andy and David, I'm going to ask you each for a very quick comment, because I want to bring Jason in. James Nasella says we have anonymous reporting systems for whistleblowers. Why can't we take a similar approach to the data we are discussing? Anonymous open door association sharing ? And the last webinar we did was on whistleblowing. So I've got a particular interest in where we are. Andy, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. David, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Andy first.
Yeah, so again, I think this is another mechanism by which information can be reported in both a confidential and sanitized way. But it goes back to the question of how that information is received, how is it shared, and where is it stored? You know, businesses are hugely sensitive around commercial disclosure or breach of confidential information, describing brand or the product that's involved. So again, the old issues raise their head as before.
Yeah, I mean, whistleblowing, a role, David, yes or no?
Whistleblower, you know, again, it has to be vetted. You know, is it done in retribution, making a false claim, or can it be, you know, documented? I think it all has to be looked at in its capsulated environment. I mean, whistleblowing is good because it will prevent problems from the future. But again, is it why is it being done, and how is it, and can it be documented?
Thank you very much indeed. At this point, I'm going to bring in Jason. Now, let me just tell you a little secret, everybody. Jason Basura is the brains behind all this. I might take the credit up front, but he was the one who put it all together. Jason, thank you very much indeed. Jason, I'd like you to, if I could, just to summarize what you think some of the key issues are and how you would like us to go away and think about it. Jason, over to you.
Certainly. Thanks a bunch, Martin. The resources guide that were attached in the portal additionally help to outline what those food protection mindsets and issues are. Martin, I want to thank you and the team, Shrey, for your support in pulling this off. Certainly thanks to our presenters, speakers, and some of the other information that they've provided as well. But in summary, thinking through what Andy said as the perfect storm relative to the variety of insults that could impact the transportation, move, and distribution of goods isn't obvious, and that applies to all, not just the food and ag system. Mark talked about those cross-functional partnerships and thinking through those non-traditional academia, NGO, private-public partnerships as well, and thinking about the predictive preparedness, Mark. Thank you very much for that. I thought Megan tied the first two presentations up perfectly. What can you do? Thinking about the audience who's on here today, what is it that you can do to support and to increase those partnerships, collaborations, and information sharing? And then finally, David, with some of those examples of those incidents that have occurred and the critical importance of information sharing. I like the question about the Holy Grail, because, you know, it's like the brass ring on the carousel. How do we get there? I do want to ask Shrey to post a couple of comments in the chat box relative to a couple of successes that I am aware of and am proud to be a partner with. Number one, the FAA and MITRE domestically in the United States as well as globally have created an information sharing portal to ensure security of the aviation industry. Project Opsin, if you're not familiar with it, is another fascinating resource. A tremendous amount of respect for the organization. And then finally, thinking through what some of the other examples that we've talked to from food protection elements, specifically the Food Industry Intelligence Network. So Andy, a tremendous success that started off in Europe, and it's a globally recognized opportunity for sharing those informations globally. I've got a friend who recently retired, and he said the importance of building trust. David, thank you for that. pick up the damn phone. You know, make a phone call, reach out, send an email, shoot a text. Mark, Andy, Megan, David, you know, we do that at nights and weekends, perhaps more than we should, but I think to summarize, as Mark, you had said, friends today, friends tomorrow, absolutely. And Martin, thank you so much for your work.
Jason, thank you. Great summary. And just to say, Jason, what we will do is in the blog that we do to accompany this, we'll put all that information in the blog as well, Jason. So it'll be there alongside the webinar.
Certainly. Thank you, Martin. If I could add quickly a quick shout out for Rich Whiteup. He's on the line. He was the original connection of us to you for this opportunity. Rich is a former past president of As Is International. That information is available on the Food Safety Tech website, which is also included in the resource links as well. And if it wasn't for Rich's connection to you with that As Is connection relative to our food defense and ag security community, this would not have happened. So Rich, I appreciate you, buddy. And Martin, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Always happy to praise Rich Whittup. He was a great guy. And thank you, Rich. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate your comments. Just a few final things from me. Just to let you know, and we're going to come back to this topic, by the way. We're going to come back to it. Nominations are open for the Nigeria OSPAs, the South Africa OSPAs, the Romanian OSPAs, and the US OSPAs. Do get your nominations in now. The closing dates are on the screen. No need to hold back. Get them in. We've got award ceremonies coming up in India, New Zealand, and Ireland. I'm going to be in all three. Come and see us at the Indian Auspicious on the 25th of March, New Zealand in Auckland on the 14th of April, Dublin, Ireland on the 26th of May. Come and see us. And finally, to say that we're going to be at the security event. We've got a stand. We're going to be there in person, me and the team. So come and say hello to all of us. Christine Brooks will be there as well. And finally, to say that the next webinar will be on the 30th of March, falling victim to fraudsters. How do you stop it and what do you do to victimize? Look out then for cybercrime, also on measuring EDI against business performance. All these are coming up in the future. Once again, thank you very much indeed to Jason and all the panelists. Thank you very much indeed to you. And as you know, I always say at this point, I hope we meet again soon. Until we do, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.